Hi, I'm Michael, and this is Let's Talk Climate. In this video, we're going to look at how many wind turbines are needed to supply the entire world's electricity demand. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to the channel and to hit the like button. Now, to do this calculation, we're going to have to make a few assumptions and also look at some past data. First, we're going to need to know what the current and future electricity demand is. Electricity demand in 2019 was 23,900 terawatt hours. 5.3% of that electricity consumed, or 1,266 terawatt hours, was produced by wind already. And the International Energy Agency projects that electricity demand will continue to rise in 2030 by about 17%, between 27,000 and 29,000 terawatt hours. So we'll go with the middle of the estimate at 28,000 terawatt hours in 2030. Next, we need to select a wind turbine form factor to base these calculations off of. There are many different kinds of wind turbines. However, the most common that are used for large-scale electricity generation are the three-bladed turbines. The amount of electricity a turbine can generate depends on three main factors: wind speed, air density, and blade radius. You can see from this size chart for turbines that commercial turbines can range from producing less than a megawatt of power to as high as 10 megawatts. The most common commercial turbines, however, are between 2 to 3 megawatts. So for these calculations, we'll use a 2.5 megawatt turbine form factor. Now, just because a wind turbine's peak capacity is 2.5 megawatts doesn't mean that it'll be producing that amount of power all the time. That's where the load factor comes in. The load factor is essentially the true average actual energy output from the turbine over a period of time. And this will depend on geographic location, how windy the area is, time of year, etc. For onshore wind turbines around the world, the load factor is somewhere around 25 to 30% of the peak capacity, whereas offshore wind turbines can be as high as 40% or even greater. For our calculations, we'll go with the lower number of 25%. Now, to determine the number of watt hours the turbine will produce in a given year, we take the 2.5 megawatts, multiply it by the load factor of 25%, multiply that by the number of days in a year, and then by the number of hours in a day. And so what we get is a 2.5 megawatt turbine could produce somewhere around 5,475 megawatt hours in a year. Now, to calculate how many 2.5 megawatt turbines are needed to supply the world's electricity demand in 2019, we divide the total 23,900 terawatt hours of consumption by 5,475 megawatt hours created by each turbine. And just note that 1 terawatt hour is the equivalent of 1 million megawatt hours. When we run these numbers, we find that we would need 4.4 million wind turbines to completely supply the world's electricity demand in 2019. Now, since about 5.3% of the 2019 electrical grid was powered by wind already, that would mean we actually would need 4.1 million new turbines. Now, what would the cost of this be? According to WeatherGuardWind.com, it currently costs about $1.3 million US per megawatt of installed capacity. So for the 4.1 million new turbines, that would be an estimated cost of about 13.4 trillion US dollars. Keep in mind, though, is that as you build more and more of these turbines around the world, costs will decline and efficiency will go up. So these figures are probably on the higher end. Now, since 2019 is already behind us and electricity demand keeps increasing each year, how many wind turbines would we need to meet our electricity demand for the year 2030, which would be 28,000 terawatt hours estimated? The answer is we would need an additional 4.9 million turbines, which would cost as much as $15.9 trillion. Now, a more likely future scenario, if the world went all in on renewable energy, is it will probably be a mix of wind and solar. So in the case that it's 50% wind, 50% solar in 2030, we would need about 2.3 million turbines, which would cost $7.6 trillion. So now that we know some rough numbers of how many wind turbines are needed to meet our electricity demands, how many years would it theoretically take to build out this capacity? So we know that in 2020, the world installed a record 93 gigawatts of wind capacity. If we just assume that all those new wind turbines were 2.5 megawatt, that would mean that in 2020, around 37,200 wind turbines were installed. So if we need 4.9 million turbines to power the world in 2030, at this current rate, it would take about 131 years to build out that capacity. Now, if the electricity grid in 2030, for example, was 50% wind, 50% solar, that's 2.3 million turbines we need to build, which would take 62 years. So even though 2020 was a record year for installing wind capacity, at the current installation rate, it wouldn't be until the year 2081 until 50% of the electricity grid was powered by wind. And that's even assuming that electricity demand doesn't keep increasing beyond the year 2030, which it probably will. So to me, the take-home message is if we want the planet to be 100% powered by renewable energy, and we think that wind will be a major component of that, we need to at least double or triple our current production rates to make that happen anytime soon. Let me know in the comments below what you think about these numbers. Are they realistic? And what questions would you like me to answer in future videos? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Until next time.